Welcome back to San Francisco, Global Marketing Day. We have reached, we're finishing off hour 22 apparently. I've lost count. I hope you guys are enjoying sticking around. I saw a lot of your stuff on Twitter. I said I was gonna go check it out. A lot of people are saying they couldn't take coffee breaks because they were enjoying the content so much. That means a lot to us. Great job to the team over there at SEM Rush pulling together an awesome panel. And we're gonna go even to the next level on this session because we're not gonna have one, we're gonna have two awesome speakers. And then we're gonna bring back a repeat guest to add some additional context to the conversation. For those that are just joining, my name is Brian Fanzo, millennial keynote speaker, podcaster, founder of iSocial Fans, and I'll be your host for the rest of the day. And so I'm excited. We have these lovely two ladies that are going to talk to us from, both of them are from SurveyMonkey, and we have Morgan, who's the senior manager of product marketing, and Colette, who's the content strategist over there at SurveyMonkey. And at SurveyMonkey, they've worked with lots of different technologies, lots of different companies, lots of different brands. So I'm excited to see where this conversation goes, how we can kind of take this to the next level and really ask the right questions. And with that, I will let you ladies take over from here.
Awesome, thank you, Brian. So as you mentioned, we're both from SurveyMonkey. I'm Morgan. I lead product marketing for our market research solutions, including SurveyMonkey Audience, which is our global panel for do-it-yourself market research.
I'm Colette DeGeorge. I'm a content strategist.
And what we're going to be talking about today is the perfect intersection of my background, Colette's background, coming from market research and now focusing on marketing at SurveyMonkey. This topic about using original research to power your thought leadership and content strategy is just a really fun topic for both of us. And Colette coming from the PR world and now working in corporate content strategy, it's really the intersection of our passions. And so we're going to get into it. We're going to talk about what the value of using original research in your content. We're going to get into some practical tips and tricks, show you some examples. And then, since 15 minutes is pretty short, we'll give you a really great resource that you can download and use later when you're trying to do this for your own company. All right, so part one.
Cool. So we're going to talk a little bit about original research and the way that we use it at SurveyMonkey. There's a few major use cases that we like to talk about. One is SEO, brand awareness, strong partnerships, and we also use it for demand gen.
All right, so the first example has to do with building SEO magic with your content fueled by original research. This is a really great example from Andy Crestodina over at Orbit Media Studios. So what he does, and they're on year 5 of this, folks, so they've found a sweet spot here and they continue to do it. So they do original research on a very specific topic and they continue to publish it year over year, and this has generated over 500 backlinks to their website on just this one piece of research alone. And what they do is they take a topic that is frequently stated, yet rarely supported with real data, and then they fill that gap with their own data. So in this case, it's all about blogging statistics. So at this company, Orbit Media, they focus on web and digital strategy, and so a lot of their target audience is focused on building out a website, a blog, etc. And so they figured that their audience would be interested in learning more about blogging statistics. And so they had some questions. How long does it take to write a blog? A lot of people say it takes a long time to write a blog, but who really knows how long it takes? Well, Orbit Media has done the research, and they publish these findings, and then they optimize their content for topic, fill in the blank, statistics, in this case blogging statistics, and this has really been successful for Orbit Media. So you take that topic that's highly talked about in your organization or your industry, you find that research, you fill that gap, and then you write about it, and magic happens. You'll get backlinks.
Okay, so I'm going to talk about using original research in PR. And every company wants to be written about. Everyone wants lots of brand awareness, but maybe you don't have any news cycles, or maybe journalists don't think your product is interesting as you think it is. So original research is a really good way to make headlines and say something unique and totally interesting. And we've done this a ton with lots of different companies. The example that we're pointing to here is Netflix. Netflix did some research about cheating on your partner by watching shows when they're not there, which I think is something that probably most people have experienced or heard about. I know that my fiance is super guilty of this. So they put out a report. They got over 80 media mentions, including super high tier press, CNN, The Verge, publications like that. And obviously Netflix is a huge name, but we also had a project management company called Orig that did something similar. They did research about swearing in the workplace, which is tangentially related to what they do, but enough for them to have a justification to talk about it. They got over 100 media mentions, and they're not, a huge brand name like Netflix. So if you can find something that's interesting to your audience, then you can use original research to do something that's truly newsworthy, and you can even divide it into different parts. You can give one publication chance to weigh in advance before you publish it, and even get them to collaborate with you on the survey so that you get you're guaranteed for them to run it. So if you're creative with the way that you do original research, you don't have to have an interesting product. You don't have to have a crazy, new innovation. You can still get the same level of attention as another company. And then this is talking a little bit more about partnerships. So at SurveyMonkey, we love to partner with other companies for a multitude of reasons. One is it just creates a good relationship, but two is that you get access to a totally new audience. So something that we'll do a lot is create a joint research report with another company where we collaborate on the survey, we publish it, and then we co-brand and co-promote it. So sometimes that means that we're sharing leads, sometimes it's we're both sharing on social media, sometimes it's we both do our email campaigns, but the result is that we have this co-branded original research that's newsworthy, it's interesting, it's relevant for both of our audiences, and we just have a guaranteed landing for all of that content with a different group.
And then the last example is all about demand generation. This was a study actually done by Mantis Research and BuzzSumo that found about 2/3 of marketers are gating the findings of their research. So really using this to drive leads for their sales team. A really great example, or I guess a classic example of this, are the state of reports. So take your industry and then the audience that you will be targeting as far as lead gen, do a big over-encompassing state of report. In this case, Drift did a report actually in collaboration with our audience product for a 2019 state of conversational marketing. This is a really fun one for them. They've built this category of conversational marketing, and this study has everything to do with chatbots and how how consumers are interacting with digital media. And so this is a great report. They gated the report. They're collecting leads. We're doing a webinar on it next month. So it's a great way to take a research piece and then really drive business value through demand generation, press mentions, SEO magic, etc. And so we did a little bit of research on our own to understand the value not only for the business but for your readers.
Yeah, so we just did some research to see how people react to different types of content. We wanted to justify that original research is also valuable for the reader and not just for the companies that are putting it out. And we asked people if they'd rather read an article based on data or read an op-ed, and 82% of people said that they'd rather read an article based on data, and then 74% said that they consider data stories to be more trustworthy, 73% said more persuasive, and 44% said more fun to read. And this is not including all the people that were neutral, so these are just the people that were opinionated that data stories are better.
All right, so you've understood the value of original research for your content marketing. We're going to get into some tips and tricks for doing survey research the right way. The first piece is all about picking the right topic. So aligning a topic that is tangential or peripheral to your brand and interesting to your target audience. In this case, we're showing an example where SurveyMonkey did a study on microaggressions in the workplace. A ton of HR managers use SurveyMonkey to gather employee feedback and understand employee satisfaction and happiness at the workplace. And this was a really interesting topic, especially with all of the issues that we are seeing in the workplace, the heightened sensitivity towards diversity and inclusion. And so this was a really great study that we did. Actually, Colette worked on this one. Mm-hmm. And so we did a really interesting mix here of quantitative and qualitative research. So beyond picking the topic, how are you going to be able to tell a really interesting story with your data? One is mixing the format of quantitative and qualitative research. We could get some really interesting stats about, in this case, how employers think aggressors should be managed in the workplace, but we also dug into experiences that people have. So we got some really interesting quotes of how people have been experiencing microaggressions in the workplace, which added a lot of color and interesting commentary to the story. When you get really nitty-gritty into survey methodology, there are a couple things that work really well for content. One is using scaled answer options in your question. So this was actually a question that we asked about the trustworthiness of content containing data. We have a scale for much more trustworthy all the way down to much less trustworthy. What's great about it is you can take multiple answer options, combine them in the results, and you have a bigger stat to publish. Another example would be a polarizing question. So in this case, this was a little bit of a would you rather. So in this case, would you rather read an article based on data or the writer's opinion? You get polarizing statistics, which again leads to really big punchy data points. In this case, 82% rather read an article based on data. And then the other thing to mention, so beyond the questions that you're asking in your survey, you definitely want to add some key demographic questions. And this will help you segment and filter your data later on to pull out those interesting insights and tidbits. The difference between genders or age groups or education level, et cetera. In that Reich study about swearing in the workplace that Colette mentioned, turns out women swear more than men at the workplace, so who knew? So then once your survey is created, you need to decide who you're going to send your survey to. Who's going to take your survey? There's a lot of options out there. You could use your own contacts, your email list of your customers, your social media followers. And if you have a wide following or a wide customer base, this works really well. But when you don't have access to that target audience that you need, tools are available. SurveyMonkey has a global panel called SurveyMonkey Audience where you can just pop in, select your criteria, and send your survey out and get results in minutes. Super easy. All right, part 3.
Cool. This will be very fast. So I never just do the original research and then make one thing out of it. I always try to chop it up and get the most value out of it. This is a graphic that we got from Mantis Research, again, about how the types of content that people use to make out of their original research. So blog posts, obviously very common, infographics, social media, articles on other websites, charts, press releases, presentations, videos, webinars. Also, like huge ebooks and white papers are something that's very typical. Interactive graphics, online quizzes, and assessments. So we have done all of these at SurveyMonkey for sure. And usually what we'll do is do one major asset, maybe that's like a giant report, and then we'll break it down into smaller blog posts, social media assets, a video if it's really compelling. And that way we really ensure that we get the most out of what we've invested heavily in figuring out. Like these numbers are super strategic for us, and so we try to get the most value out of that.
All right, and since we're just about out of time, we want to leave you with a resource. We've written an ultimate guide, 12,000 words long, that's all packed with awesome tidbits, research best practices from our survey experts, our content strategists that you can take and read and do the same thing at your company.
Also free calculators for figuring out like sample size and more scientific things like that.
Yeah, it's packed with a lot of juicy goodness, so check it out. And that's all from us.
That was great. Can you go back one slide real quick?
Yeah, of course.
You guys, there's so much good stuff. I have to get it. See, there you go. I need to get that. I think when you dive into research and make research not only actionable for marketers, but make a lot of sense in the content game, it's exciting. It was a great presentation. I really enjoyed that. And so we're going to bring in our third member here to the group, and it's Armando Biondi.
Yes.
Oh. Italian dad will be okay. I pronounced his last name correctly. I messed it up earlier for those that were not watching earlier. And Armando is the Chief Growth Officer at Mail Up Group. And I think a lot of this conversation comes around not only being creative with using research, but understanding the role research plays. Andy Cresadina is a really good friend of mine. Love that you used Andy's example. I think when you find a gap and you double down and then you realize it works and you just keep going. I mean, he's proven the fact more times than we can imagine. Armando, what are your thoughts? Like, where do you you see research in your market and the things that you're doing? And how are some of these things getting creative that kind of excite you?
Yeah, it's a very good question. So research is one of the ingredient of like kick-ass content that you can make as a strategy. Usually, particularly these days, everyone is doing some kind of content. Everyone has a content strategy. Everyone is writing stuff. Really, the things that do work have, generally speaking, three ingredients, right? One is data, which is unique and important to you and to your industry. Number two is having kind of a counterintuitive, peculiar thesis that you can spend and talk about and attract, an audience around. Number three, it's like writing that doesn't suck. So, it's entertaining and, people can read it easily. And so if you have research, if you have data around your company, you can totally package like a very, very compelling and effective strategy around it. Plus, content is the only marketing tactic or strategy that compounds over time. So that is also, an additional advantage that you want to keep in mind.
I love that. And I have a couple more questions. I see some of your questions are coming in. Those that are watching live, make sure you include your questions down below or above, depending on where you're watching. And if you're on Twitter, you should be on Twitter. But if you're on Twitter, use the hashtag Global Marketing Day to join the conversation. One of the questions came in from Victor, who is like the man. You're making my job easier, Victor. You're asking great questions in every session. Hopefully you're drinking lots of coffee, staying awake there for us. But this is a great question. I think for a lot of people when they hear research, they're like, my team's too small. My business is too small. How do I even find the people, and how much time is it going to take me as a small team? How do you guys approach that for someone that maybe, and to his question, he's like, how does a small company that doesn't have a huge community get data for a study of value? How would you answer that?
Well, so part of that is about finding the right people to take your survey. We mentioned contacts, customers, social media followers, but if you're really small, say startup, and you don't have that already, online panels are a great way to source those respondents, and nowadays there are DIY options for that. You can find them online and check out for as little as $1 a response and immediately get the statistical significance that you would need to pitch data to a journalist, say.
I love that. I actually use SEMrush with the plug here for a lot of my stuff. When I'm a team of one for a lot of things that I do, and for me it's like asking the right questions, getting to the right audience. Mm-hmm. And Colette, one of the questions that came in was really focusing on, and I love this one. How do you make fun and exciting survey if your questions are really boring? How would you approach that? And I think that's an interesting way of putting it.
Yeah, I think. First of all, your questions never have to be boring necessarily. Even if you find something that's obvious, you can still make it interesting. If you find that like 93% of people like chocolate, you know that there are 7% of people that are sociopaths. And so you can get a little creative. Even if your product field seems a little limited, I think you can get creative in the questions that you ask. One thing that we did, Morgan and I were at a talk recently where we did sort of a crowd storm with the audience, and people were suggesting ideas of what different people could research based on their employer. And one thing that came up was, would you rather, I think he worked for like a industrial manufacturing company or something, and it was like, would you rather wait and try to fix your machine that had broken or like eat 7 spiders? And so like that gives you like a funny stat, because it's like 80% of people would rather eat 7 spiders than have to deal with this malfunctioning piece of equipment or whatever. So you can get creative and like punky with stuff like that. And the other thing is, if you feel limited, if you get your data back and you're not excited about it, you can always combine it with other pieces of research, do secondary research basically, and like maybe there's something interesting in that.
I come from the world of traditional market research where methodology was king, and you had to, balance your answer options and, ask everything in an unbiased way. And when you're creating content, you can be a little bit looser with your survey methodology, and which makes it fun.
And I also think adding a personality to the question, right? Like not only with the context of the question, but like I've always enjoyed a survey that when I feel like the person that is actually doing the survey is asking the questions, because if you know a little bit more context of them, that idea of the 7 spiders, maybe they're terrified of spiders to begin with. Now it's even amplified more, right? They had to type that. For me, it would be pickles. I hate pickles. Like that's my weird thing. I actually have pickle for Halloween tomorrow because my daughters make fun of me not liking pickles. Isn't that a very interesting? See, something you didn't know you were going to learn. See that, and so if I told you a survey question about pickles, you would really understand.
I understand why.
Yeah, now you understand why I'm doing that as well.
To kind of zero in a little bit more on that individuality aspect, Morgan mentioned having a combination of statistic things and open-ended questions, and we always suggest limiting open-ended questions because it takes more time to write answers, but including at least one or two, because that's where you'll get, even if all of your statistics are kind of obvious, like if you allow people to write something in and one person writes in just like a crazy thing, you can quote that and that's part of your findings.
I like that. I like the idea of limiting that, yeah.
You can also invent data as well, which you shouldn't do, but you know.
Well, let's face it, I mean, 99% is made up, and then there's other 20% somewhere else that we're playing with. Armando, I'm curious from your side, when we're looking at like demographics or even ways to, let's take the research out of like the survey or content, what are other ways you can, as a business owner, as someone that's working in the business, really move the business needle with research that maybe people aren't thinking about, especially marketers in that space?
Yeah, very good question. One thing that I could think about very easily is how you apply segmentation around the usage of your product, right? So kind of mixing the data with like looking at what people do in product and then having triggers and segmenting that information based on customer persona or, a geolocation. That is very interesting, and usually you uncover things that you didn't know before.
Which is probably the most exciting part, right? Mm-hmm. And I think being prepared to, you're asking questions is always great, but when you get answers you don't expect, you have to be also okay with figuring that out. And we had a question that came in, and a little bit, we were kind of tongue-in-cheek about data and making up data, and we do realize that there's a massive issue of data that's not pure data and data where you can be manipulated and we can take all kinds of things different directions. And one of the comments, I love it here, said, should I always trust my data, even when at times it feels kind of,
Never trust the data.
And that was from Kandi. I love that. I mean, what are your thoughts on that, data? Because there are the anomalies, which we know better to throw those out. But there's also that sometimes where you're like, that's either too good to be true, or how did that go down that direction? Is there a process, you mentioned A/B testing, even re-examining the questions and being it might have been the way we asked the question that allowed the data to get out of hand, not as much the data being bad?
Yeah, so because my background is in PR, I am used to, whenever I get a report or something like this, I'm like, a journalist isn't going to be as happy-go-lucky about getting this information as maybe the average person reading a corporate blog. So what are the bite backs that I'm going to get, and going through those and scrutinizing myself, and how bad is it going to be if I'm called out for this? And I think there are definitely certain times where I'm looking at the geography of where we got this, it looks like there's a ton of people from this demographic, and maybe that's skewing it, or maybe there's people of a certain age that have taken it too much, or maybe my sample size is really small. And so I try to factor that in and decide which risks I'm going to take. And I don't want to make a statement that's so outlandish and extreme that I'm going to get a lot of fire on it. But if something is just is interpretive and that seems like it might not be perfectly true, but it's about people's favorite colors to dress their dogs up in, then I'll still go forward with it. But if it's something that I can come under fire for, then I'll scrap it.
And the other
real quick, so there's safety measures in that, because I think that's right where you're going.
Yeah,
I was guessing where you're going to go in there, and I love that question. Thank you, Melissa.
Yeah, well, there's a couple things. One is just on the methodology of how you're getting your research. So are you balancing the sample? Are you getting a high enough sample size? Are you weighting the data post data collection? Are you looking at that the demographic fallout? But the other piece to that is, especially when you're trying to survey a very niche audience, or you're surveying your customers, which may not be as bountiful as, say, just sampling the general population. The best thing you can do is just always cite your sources. So say it was 65 people from this group over here that we asked, then at least you are transparent about where the data is coming from, and no matter what you're saying, you're at least telling them where you got the information.
And I'm sure on in the technology space, that's a major glaring spot where we have to embrace.
Yes, absolutely. And one more thing I would add to the conversation, which is validate and cross-check the data that you get. Never, what I was saying before, but never trusting the data is actually true. You want to make sure that you have a different couple of ways to get to the same data point, which are not contradicting each other. Right. And so when you kind of try and poke holes in the data stands. And so that is when you know that you can actually, rely on it a little bit.
And it's exciting too. I think I look at surveys too from a consumer perspective. There's some brands that they've sent me a survey like Delta, Away Luggage. Like I'm loyal to them, and every time it comes to my email, I spend way too much time doing this survey, which because of my loyalty to them, their brand affinity. But I will also know I appreciate when they ask the same question like 3 different ways in the survey, knowing where I know where they're going with it. Where someone just blindly clicking all the 5s, or like doing some of the naive things that we know customers or even bots are out there to do. As we kind of wrap this up, as we move forward, and I think we get more with artificial intelligence, we get more with bot data, we get more offline, online data coming to this world. What is something someone can as you're looking at research, what's some advice that you would give to someone as they're looking at doubling down this in their business?
You mean from a data cleansing standpoint?
Data.
Well, data cleansing's huge, and we talk about outliers and things. How can you look for speeders, straightliners, people who write gibberish in the open ends?
Yeah.
That is a huge priority, at least at SurveyMonkey, is how do we enable users of the platform to be able to take measures against poor data quality. But I think, to your point, part of it has to do with the survey design and asking the right questions and designing it in a way where you're going to get high quality data back.
I love it. And that, it's perfect to kind of pull this. A lot of the conversation we're having throughout this day is about pushing the needle forward, making the world a better place, understanding the data that we have. I feel as marketers, we've been asking for data forever. All of a sudden we got it, and now we're like, we don't know what to do with it, or like we don't know what questions to answer. And I think the thing comes back now to trust and understanding, putting the things out there, and really building a process that makes a lot of sense. So I want to thank Armando, Colette, and Morgan for joining us here. It was a really great discussion. For those that are still watching, we appreciate you. Use the hashtag Global Marketing Day. Jump in, add your comments, talk about all the things you've learned throughout the day. This is 22 hours worth of information you guys have been had access to. We'd love to hear what your best sound bites. What are the things that stand out to you the most? And we'll be back in a couple more minutes with a couple more great sessions before we wrap up this day. So we'll see you soon.